This is a vintage Rex Cole brand air circulator, or otherwise known as a Hassock fan. This was my grandmother's. Very unique design, all metal, of course. This is just, it almost reminds you of the Statue of Liberty. Hideous looking on its own, but it's a thing of beauty because it's the Statue of Liberty. Green like that. Of course, it was painted green as such. This, of course, has a story. We're going to get into that in a minute. This has been refurbished by Lexmarks567, so big thanks to him. Let me show you the label here. It's a metal tag, Rex Cole air circulator. And let me see if I can read it at all. Model 12C, it looks like. $95 and it says Rex Cole Incorporated, Long Island City, New York. That is actually important. Let me get the camera on the tripod and I'll tell you the story of this and what I know about it, what I don't, and all kinds of stuff like that. So this thing is absolutely awesome. This was my grandmother's. Now, my grandmother lived to be 98 years old, so this thing is definitely dating back. My grandmother, I know she lived in Syracuse, New York with my mother when my mother was a child, till she was, I don't know, 10, 11 years old, something. I don't really know exactly. And then they moved to Brooklyn. I don't know exactly where in Brooklyn they were at the time. My grandmother eventually settled in Brighton Beach in Brooklyn, New York for the later part of her life. And this fan had moved with her. Now, she was obviously married at one point. Her husband was gigolo, I guess you could call him, something like that, and left her when the kids were 10, 9, I don't know. So she was a single mother, which was pretty rare in the 1950s. I mean, it happened, but it wasn't as prevalent. I don't know the date on this fan. I have no way of knowing exactly. As far as the label goes, it says 60 cycles and not 60 hertz. So that would date this probably early 1960s, could be 1950s. So it's either 1950 or 1960. The innards, of course, are not that vintage anymore, but the case still is. It's hideous looking. It is. I get that. It's strange. It just looks weird. It really does. I have never seen another Hassock fan that looks like this. Hassock fan, they're not very common these days, but they were more prevalent back in the day when air conditioning was not as prevalent and pretty much necessary as it is today. From what Lexmarks567 tells me, this is sort of an adaptation of a banker fan. And a banker fan, you have to consider that back in the days before air conditioning, you had fans, obviously. Now, there could be ceiling fans, box fans, all kinds of other ones. But the bank teller needed to sit there at the teller window and keep cool with air blowing, obviously. But doing that would blow papers and bills around, which is obviously a big no-no. So they got this. The air gets sucked in from underneath and through here and comes out the top. I don't know if the camera is making it out, but the bottom part of the top here is convex as such. So as the air blows up, it blows out 360 degrees. So this could be placed under the desk or under the window, if you will, and they would have a stool of some kind that they could sit on, and they would rest their feet on top. The Hassock fan is, like I said, an adaptation of that. So the story that I remember with this fan I was probably about 10 or 11 years old. My parents had gone away for the weekend with my sister for some reason. Or I don't remember exactly the circumstances, but my grandmother said, I want to take you back to Brighton Beach with me. This had to be probably around 1989, 1990, somewhere in there. So good 32, 33 years ago. And like I said, I was about 10 or 11 years old. And, you know, at the time, you know, Brooklyn, being a Long Island native, you know, Brooklyn was almost the city, almost New York City, comparatively. A lot of little shops and that, and I've told other stories on that. One in particular was The Best Set, which was an old war story by Uncle Jay. Anyways, I was there 1989, 1990. It was the summer, and Grandma did not have AC. Now, that's not exactly foreign to me, because we had AC when I was a kid, except my dad was too cheap to put it on, so we'd live in the heat. But my dad always had a fan, and he had no qualms about putting a fan and running that all day long. It never shut off. Never. So, I said, Grandma, do you have a fan? Well, not really, but, you know, but I'm a little kid, so I'm poking around. Grandma, what's this thing? What's this thing? Oh, that's a floor fan. She called it a floor fan, and it is, in a sense. And I said, does it work? I don't know, this and that. And the wiring in her apartment was janky at best. Absolutely janky. This is a replacement cord that Lexmark's 567 put on. He put heat shrink on the wire there and put one of these plugs on there that clamps on as such. So it's, you know, it sort of looks, for the most part, pretty vintage. The plug doesn't really matter. It did have a two-prong cord on it, as far as I'm aware, that was non-polarized and was probably a suicide plug. So here we are. It's the summer. And we went out to one of the stores. And in the store, I remember this precisely. I don't know why. Butterfinger candy bars. The full-size ones. 6 in a pack. And somehow I convinced Grandma to buy it for me. Man, I was in heaven. I was eating like 1, maybe even 2 a day while I was there. I was only there for a couple days, but man, oh man. Oh man, as a little kid like that, that was awesome. I happen to love Butterfinger candy. You know, chocolate bars, whatever you want to call it. I'm sitting there, and I dug this fan out, and I remember I turned it on, and it just hummed, and it didn't work. And I said, gee, that's weird. And I flipped it over, and I stuck my hand in there, and I spun the blades around and that. And I tried it a few more times, and eventually it spun up. I forget if I even oiled it, if she had some sort of oil there, inconsequential, but it ran somehow. Now, it's still blazing hot in her apartment, and we're just sitting there. I'm talking on a landline telephone, because there were no cells, really. And it was one of those ones, I don't have it anymore, it was thrown out, that the case of it was clear, so you could see the circuit board and all that stuff. And I remember the back of it had, there's some that light up with neon. This one wasn't that fancy. It had a little red light on the back that if you had it to pulse dialing, it would pulse that. And it might have flickered when it rang. I don't remember, but I'm on the phone and I'm talking to either my mother or my father on the phone. Okay, just a minute. We got a big skeeter. There we go. I got him somehow. Okay. Anyway, I don't know where he went. He's probably on my leg somewhere. Anyhow, I'm on the phone talking with my mother or my father. Now, this was Brighton Beach, Brooklyn to Long Island. back in the day, there was such a thing as long-distance telephone calls. The way this used to work was if you made a local call, and that was confusing in and of itself, but if you called your next-door neighbor, let's say, it was 10.6 cents for that telephone call, and that's it. That's what it costs for a local call. And if you made 10 of those, you were at $1 and change, 11, you know, $1 and change, $1.60, I don't know. Then you had long distance calls, which would be from New York to California or Connecticut or Vermont or another state or something. That was long distance. But there was also a regional toll call. A regional toll call was outside of your area code, outside of your calling area, if you will. But it wasn't as expensive as a long distance call. So this was a regional toll call, and it's costing money. It was charged per minute. I don't know how much, but it was charged per minute. So it was definitely a lot more than a local call that was 10.6 cents as long as you talked. This was charged per minute, or maybe by the 5-minute mark. I don't know. So I'm talking blah, 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 and I have this, and I have my feet up on top of it. And it's sort of ground down to a halt. It's running, it's on, it's blowing, and then out of nowhere, it just kind of went hum, and it's not spinning anymore. So I'm still on the corded phone, and I come down and I toggle the power switch a number of times and this and that, and it died. It just up and died. And I played with it later. I might have gotten it to run one more time. That was really it. Fast forward many years later, we can say 2010-ish, somewhere in there. Somewhere in there. I don't remember the exact time frame. My grandmother was 90-something, and it was at that point that my parents decided that she really shouldn't live alone. So they went to her apartment, and they went through all her stuff, and they moved her in with them into a spare bedroom upstairs. There were a number of things from Grandma's apartment that I got, some of which have been featured on the channel. There was one on a vintage Panasonic pencil sharpener, electric pencil sharpener, along with two others that I had made that video long time ago. Of course, there's going to be a link in the description. You should know these things by now. So that was one of them, and I have vintage Scotch tape from her, and a bunch of other office supplies, a couple of vintage irons that never made the light of day in a video. If I'll even make a video on those, I don't know. All kinds of stuff. But this fan surfaced. And I said to my dad, there's this green, funny-looking fan that's there. I need that. Because I remembered it as a kid. So at this point, I don't know if furniture was placed on top of the cord or something, but it made its way back to my dad's house. And he said, here's that fan. And the cord was chopped off, the plug was chopped off, so we stripped the wires on it and stuck those ends into a extension cord, and I think it actually ran. I think it actually ran, but then I said, wait a minute, no, because I remember this thing would have trouble, and I stopped it and put it back on, turned it off, turned it back on, and there it was. It wouldn't spin, it would just hum, and it wouldn't get going again. I said, well, I'm taking it regardless because the AC is taking the piss. So I said, I'm taking this thing regardless because I have to have this thing. It's so hideous looking that that's what the deal is. And it's so fucking vintage that it's awesome. I know all the fan toys. I know your dick is sore. I get it. Use the extra healing Jergens. It really helps. But anyway, we're going to get to powering it on very soon. Got this fan, took it home, and I took it out back sometime shortly after. And I played with it, and I played with it, and I played with it, and I said, I'm going to put a different motor in this thing because this one's shot. So I took it apart, took all these screws out. There's a million screws with nuts on the inside, and it was this whole thing, and I was outside on the green AstroTurf next to the pool. That just was a good place for it. I don't remember exactly what the deal was, but I did get it mostly apart to the point where like I got the top off, and I could get to the motor from underneath and all that kind of great stuff. So I had all these screws and the nuts. I put them in a plastic solo cup like that. So I had all of that there, and that was all fine and good. And I got the motor out. I found in my stash in the Horde another motor that had the right size for the motor shaft for the blades, but it spun the wrong direction. And I kind of got dismayed with it, and I said I'll have to look up and find another motor, and then the project lost government funding, or I don't know exactly what happened. I remember I came inside, and that night, for whatever reason, my legs were super itchy. And the reason for that, I didn't realize. The bugs were biting the ever-loving shit out of me. And I didn't want that to happen again. Why I didn't work on it here or something, I don't know. That was just the right place at the time, so I kind of lost interest in it. Got lost in the garage. And, well, not lost, it was there. And it was stored upside down, and inside of it, up in here through the blades, was that solo cup with all of the screws and nuts and that. And last year, when Lexmark's 567 was over, he said, I want to take that and refurbish that for you. I said, you're kidding. To have this work again? So he took it. And he had to look high and low for a motor that would fit. Found this one. It's a little bit different. Actually spins a little bit faster, like 50 RPM, something plus or minus, whatever. Similar to everything else, blah, blah, blah. He said the switch was shot, so he replaced the switch. And of course the cord, he went with a vintage cloth-covered cord. It actually was not an original cloth-covered cord. It was a regular vinyl plug, vinyl cord, like you'd expect. But this is really more suited to it as such. And the new motor is in there. Let us see if I turn it over like that, just so you can see in here. All metal. Everything is bolted up. There's dirt from outside because I had it in the garage. That's what all that crap is. He put felt on the... There's dirt on the cord. Felt on the metal feet here. They may have had at one point a... There's a lot of dirt on it. They may have had at one point like rubber bumpers in these things. I remember I had these, all four of these off as well. And the fan was just in a state of disrepair as such. So he put felt on here, which is just fine. It's hot glued on, so that's a perfect repair. And this way it won't mar a floor or anything like that. So it's just all there. New motor. Redid the wiring. There's crap on that. I got to clean this up, and I'm going to put it back in service, obviously. One other thing that I did want to just point out over here is there is a Good Housekeeping sticker on here, seal of approval. Indeed, it is sort of worn away, but, you know, this thing being as old as it is, you know, that's really that. All right, fan twerps, here we go. It's time to turn this guy on. We'll turn it on, turn it off, and play around with that. And then I'll see if my anemometer still works, and we'll try that out. All right, the moment you've all been waiting for. Get your Jergens, get an extra squirt of Jergens, extra pump of Jergens there. Here we go. One speed, it's fucking on or fucking off. Here we go. The airflow out of this thing, I can't even tell. It feels really nice. It blows upwards at an angle like that because of how it's designed. That's the convex shape of the top that forces it out. Blows in 360 degrees. There's no dead spots whatsoever. All around. Just perfect. We're going to do a spin down now. Okay. I gotta go change my underwear. Sorry. It's a fan. Fucking nice. I am absolutely jazzed about this. We got to do it one more time because I'm even twerping out over this thing because of the nostalgia. Gets right up to speed. And that incredible, incredible spin down. Friggin' fantabulous. Let me go see if my anemometer still works. Well, it ought to work, and it does. Last this was used, Sharky626 had borrowed this from me, and he actually put a new battery in it, which, of course, is still good. So there is our display. It has a temperature which is showing as 67.1 degrees. That's probably about 3-4 degrees off. No, actually, it's just about right. It says it's 66 here in the basement, so with my handling it, that is exactly right. And with that being said, we're going to hold this about a foot away. I'm going to just readjust the camera so we can get a better angle on this and see. The anemometer is set to feet per minute, feet per second, feet per minute. If feet per minute doesn't mean anything to you, that's great. There's this thing called Google, and you can convert that to anything else you want. You can convert it to meters per second. You can convert it to miles per hour, or any other thing that's measuring wind speed. But feet per minute is about the closest that this is going to do. Indeed, it does read and register, and that's all good. The only thing that we have to know, regardless, about whatever number this is going to display, is the higher the number, the more air it moves. So, if you had an anemometer, and you measured your fan, and it measures 500, and this measures 1,000, and we're in the same units, this should move twice as much air. It's simple fucking numbers. That's all it is. A little piece of toilet paper flapping in the breeze tells nothing about the airflow of a fan. The only thing it shows is it's moving air or it's not. Now, does it blow a little bit and then more? Sure, but how do you quantify that? Oh, the toilet paper is whipping. Oh, it's all limp like somebody used it already. What is it telling you? It tells you nothing about it. So let's get the camera reset and we'll see what the anemometer reads. So we're going to hold this about a foot away. I know there's glare on it, but I'll call it out to you. And here we go. The little impeller spins. And we're reading, let me put it here for just a minute. You got to get in the sweet spot because there's a narrow band, like this wide, where the air comes out. There's no air here, and there's no air here. So it's a narrow band, literally this width, that shows that. So about a foot away, I'm reading 400, 500, 492, depending exactly where I put it. 531, 550, So about 475 to 525, somewhere in there. Over here, I'm actually getting a little, I was getting a little more. No, about the same. There you go. Yep. Over here about 700, 708 I saw. I don't know if it's because of the angle that I'm holding it at. If that apparently does change it, because it was, yeah, there's 590, 650 something. So like I said, there is a narrow band, but like I said, you now have a number, which is a quantity. Like I have 10 jelly beans. Well, that's twice as many as 5, isn't it? So now you can quantify if we're dealing in the same units. This is feet per minute. With jelly beans, it's jelly beans. So there you go. And for what it's worth, turn it off. The anemometer slows down way before the fan. Anemometer is reading 68.3 degrees now, but again, it was being handled. I've always liked this style of fan because of their rarity, at least in today's age. You'd be hard-pressed to find, there probably are a couple out there, but not many, and they're probably all plastic and junk. This is an interesting design, and from what Lexmarks567 said about a banker's type fan that this was sort of adapted from, it makes a lot of good sense from a practical standpoint in a room, because if you have papers around, you know, there you go. And if you have this on the floor and you're sitting in an easy chair, you can position this in just the right position, and hey, it blows out and around. It will circulate the air in the room. It does say air circulator. Sucks in from the bottom and goes out there, so the cold air by the floor goes up into the room and circulates that way. So it kind of goes out and around. Try to do it this way, out and around, and that. And it makes great sense to have it in a 360 degree fashion to effectively cool the room, because that way people sitting all around the room will have nice cool air on them. Whether it's blowing directly on them or not, it will help to equalize the air temperature in the room throughout. They do make and still sell heaters that are 360 degree design. There's a couple of Honeywell out there. In fact, I even did a review of one from Aldi. I don't own that one. My dad actually does. It was one of those where my mother wouldn't fucking shut up. So he said, you know what? It's worth the $25 to shut her the fuck up, and he bought it. And it's been sitting in the box since, because then she just forgets about it. So anyway, that's how that works. He let me borrow it to make a video and brought it back. But the Rexcoil, I mean, look at this thing. This is just, it's so hideous that it's awesome. You just can't find this. And, you know, like I said before about my grandmother and Brooklyn and Brighton Beach and wherever else in Brooklyn she lived, it's all the same kind of in Brooklyn. Long Island City is very much not far from there. So as the saying goes, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. There also was, this was probably, I don't know where this was sold in Long Island City or manufactured. I'm sure they're long out of business. But there were a lot of places back in the 50s and 60s and maybe even into the 70s that would make appliances just for that area. In other words, they weren't distributed nationwide like any China product is today. And a classic example of that is a Muntz, M-U-N-T-Z, television set. Muntz was a gentleman who manufactured electronics, and the legend goes that he would make very, very inexpensive TV sets that you'd find at a much lower price than your other brand of the day, such as maybe an Admiral or a General Electric or what have you, back when. They were a lot cheaper because what he did was he would go in there with wire cutters and he'd start clipping components out. He'd take a brand new TV, fully operational, and start clipping components out. And by doing that, he could then build his own that wouldn't need to include all of those components and therefore would be less expensive. And there were a lot of them in the Brooklyn and probably Manhattan and maybe even Queens area, all in that general consensus, that area. I don't know how to explain it. And the reason why they did so well back in the day was because they were so inexpensive. But what did you give up for that? You actually gave up not too much. The only drawback of buying a month's set was that if you moved from there to, let's say, Connecticut, you weren't picking anything up on that TV, because a lot of the components that he clipped out of those TVs were to enable longer range pickup on the old antennas that we had back in the day when everything was analog and that. So they worked great in the Brooklyn and Queens and Bronx and Staten Island, Manhattan, all the boroughs in New York, in that area, because things were broadcasting from the Empire State Building, or in the 70s, the World Trade Center, because that's where the transmitters were oftentimes, or in that general locale. So if you're in that area, you don't need long distance reception. You had everything you needed, and you got them at a cheaper price. So there were a lot of things that were manufactured in the New York area, and this goes for any other state, where there was a lot of stuff that was made just for that kind of area before we had nationwide trucking and stuff like that. I mean, you can go to Walmart and buy a box fan today, and then I can go to California and go to a Walmart there and buy the very same one that I could buy here, because it's all nationwide stuff now coming from China. But back in these days, fully American made right here in New York. It's just, I am so glad to have this back around. Fairly quiet as well. Just, I'm absolutely thrilled that this is back. And it's in rough shape, but that sort of adds to the vintage charm of it. I think we've rambled on long enough. We'll give you one more up and down, just so you get your dick up and down one more time. Two pairs of underwear in one day. God. Anyway, big special thanks to Lexmarks567 for redoing this guy here. Thank you so much, man. This is just a piece that nobody else has this. So there weren't that many of these around to begin with, so it's a pretty rare piece. And now to have it fully functional again is really, really something. I thank you very, very kindly for watching, and I appreciate it very much. Make sure you click like, make sure you click subscribe, and take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.